This is the Resonant Identity, a podcast about who you are, who you're becoming, and what you stand for. And I am Terrence Waters, the host of this podcast. If this work resonates with you, I invite you to follow the show on anywhere you get your podcasts, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Spreaker. And a quick note before we begin, I just let you know that AI was used to help me generate this episode, and every part of it was reviewed and verified by me before publication. While I'm definitely a human and I'm directly speaking to you, the content that we write and share was generated using it. And at FluxSign, we advocate for responsible, transparent AI usage and take full accountability of the content that we share here across our platforms. To learn more, please visit fluxline.pro/legal and click on the option that says Responsible AI Usage. And the Resonant Identity is meant to be an education tool and reflective framework and not a clinical service. It is designed to support personal insight, identity clarity, and narrative growth, but it is not a substitute for therapy, counseling, or other professional mental health care. If you're navigating significant emotional distress, crisis, or mental health concerns, please seek support from a qualified professional who can provide the care and guidance that you need. And with that legal stuff out of the way, let's go ahead and get into today's topic, which is the mind lies to us. Now, we've kind of gone over this a couple of episodes, but I do want to reiterate it here, that we use this information from the mind to help us make decisions. But the funny part about it is we really would look at this mind as if we were to avoid them as a playful friend. Because honestly, if we were to receive and take advice from our minds, we would completely run away from that person because they are constantly giving us information that just really has no relevance. And it's just because the mind isn't really malicious. That's not the point of it. It's just that it's protective, primitive, and pattern hungry. Because what it does is looking at us to say, how can we resolve the issue that's in front of us? And in the mind's best interest, of course, it's there to try to help us because it is really the full CPU of how our entire system functions. And it only lies to us just because it's trying to keep us alive using outdated software. Just because the only frame of reference that it has is the vast unknown of its past recollection of our lives, right? And so we do need to look at it that way. Yes, we do deem that this mind, for whatever reason, is really this demon or whatever else that just seems to have our best interests and constantly makes us in this really bad frame of mind. But it's only doing its job with the best information that it has available to it. That's all it can really do for us. So I also want to just kind of clarify that I'm still working on making sure that this podcast really resonates with everyone, and I'm doing the best that I can with the work that I have. I'm still learning really what my voice is. I'm still really learning what I need to do to make this podcast work. And I'll be honest, I'm still finding that I'm making mistakes. Last episode, there were some issues with the ad campaigns. There were issues with what happened in terms of plugs and changes and transitions. And so again, thanks for bearing with me. I'm really doing my best to make this work. So we're just going to keep learning, keep evolving. That's what we do in identity transformation anyway, which is literally doing the best that we can to evolve into the person we want to be. And we're going to have some fun today because really you're going to start seeing how the mind really becomes the force center of not only distortion, but really how we're able to make good and well thought out decisions. So it happens to be an interesting paradox. It is that weird friend that we just kind of want to look on the side and just wonder where the hell they're coming up with their information. But at the same time, they're also dependable. They're a person that actually works with us to ensure that we make decisions in line with who we are and who we are becoming. And the notes from this actually received from my upcoming forthright book, The Resonance Core Framework, which comes from chapter 3, The Mind Lies to Us, and also later in part 2, where we talk about the vast unknown in the subconscious mind later in that chapter, in that section. You can also find more information from psychology-related sources and philosophy, from Aristotle, and some areas including the polyvagal theory, which you can find in the show notes. So why does the mind lie to us exactly? Like, what is its deal? Why is it constantly trying to give us information that just does not make sense, that is so completely against what we're actually experiencing? And it's for the same reasons that we talked about before, where the body is keeping the score as the first gate. which is the brain has evolved again for survival, not accuracy. It works itself using what's called pattern recognition, which is trying to find invention of information that seems to go along with what we're experiencing in the moment when data actually is missing. And what it tends to do is it fills that gap with things that just unfortunately usually are shrouded in distortion. And we'll explain where this source comes from here in a little bit. But what it does is it develops stories, assumptions. It projects some of our emotions onto it. And it also catastrophizes, which I can never say that word because who came up with that word? But seriously, that's what the brain does, is it just looks at the information and pattern recognition and gives us a well thought out thought to the best of its knowledge with the outputs of what currently is giving us from the inputs that it receives. Because really, the brain would rather give you a wrong answer than nothing at all. And it's for that specific reason, survival. It's giving you that information to being able to look at the situation and say, how can I make the best decision with the data sets and information that I currently have? And how can I also make sense of it as well? And usually the brain fills it with holes based in, again, a distorted reality from our past experience. This comes from the three big categories of mental lies. And now we're going to expand our definition of what distortion is by adding a little bit more to it to kind of explain how it actually results in distortion when we receive those judgments or those thoughts or those narratives. Now, the first one we already know about, which is called distortion, which we call specifically in psychology cognitive distortion, which is catastrophizing, again, that word, black and white thinking, and personalization. Now, what does that mean? Our brain, first and foremost, when we go through the threat response cycle of our nervous system, likes to tell us the worst of ourselves, loves to give us that narrative that we are a failure, that we fucked up. Forgive my French. There's no better way to explain it because we get those so many times in our life. And also, this is a result of what's called black and white thinking, which is usually the idea of saying that it is only this or only that. Only black, only white. Only good, only evil. Only up, only down. And it fails to account for this one thing that's really called nuance, which we'll get to a little bit later. But the brain really likes to think of things in black and white terms, on and off, up and down, and so on. And what it does is it then takes that thinking and personalizes it to what it thinks we are in terms of our past identity, not our current and our future, like we explained in past episodes. And so what the mind does is it compresses complexity into very simple, easy to understand stories, which usually are emotionally charged. Because most of the time when we experience those narratives and stories of I'm a failure, or I'm not lovable, or I just don't get anything right, it doesn't just simply give us those thoughts, it also happens to incorporate emotions as part of it as well. And that's why they feel so real and why we think they're so real. Because not only are we thinking about these things, we have emotions to match it. We feel shame whenever we make a mistake. We feel fear whenever we're about to do something in line with our current identity. We feel guilt when we just notice that we made that same mistake that we did 2 weeks ago. And if you don't listen to the body with what it's trying to do, it gives us that impression that really what we've experienced is the truth. It is the truth. There is no other way to explain what it is we're experiencing, which is far from it, by the way. And that is the basic sort of how distortion happens in our lives. The next one is called suppression, which what this does is suppresses or hides information that gives us the ability to maintain internal stability. What that means in this case is when it formulates a narrative, a story, something that we think makes sense to us, it then tends to shroud the actual truth of reality away from us and instead pushes that narrative because it goes against what the actual conclusion it came from was. So, for example, let's say you failed a test in a midterm And yes, you're going to be losing out on that A that you really wanted in that course, right? Well, your idea of being a perfectionist now coincides with this in saying that you are now not a perfectionist, right? Because of black and white thinking. When in reality, all you did was you just simply got a C on the midterm. It is in no way impactful or showing you that you will 100% not get an A or are a failure. But the thing is, the brain then takes that truth, the actual reality of the situation, which was you only got a C on the midterm, you didn't get an A, and it shrouds that and instead looks at it as says a C is a failure. And it pushes that truth away from you and instead pushes its narrative of you are a failure. And you constantly are going over that because you then feel those emotions that match with it. And what then happens is, then once you don't start listening to that actual whisper with what comes in, it then eventually starts yelling at you. It actually brings it so loud, much louder to you because that's what feels real. The emotions, the narratives, the thoughts are really what take hold rather than your ability to perceive and understand what is true reality. And this happens in three specific steps: the emotional backlog, which again is how we feel the same way when we feel we're a failure or unlovable or so on, which then shows itself in what's called somatic tension, where then your body starts reacting to it even more from what your emotional response was. That includes things like chest tightening. Your eyes start to experience tunnel vision. You start to breathe heavier. You start experiencing those somatic cues that match your actual emotional state. And from that, your body and your emotion then interprets that as distortion, a misrepresentation of what really is happening in front of you. That is how suppression works, because the mind experiences something with what is called cognitive dissonance, which is it's given information of truth, but it actually goes against its frame of reference in understanding who you are or what it knows as quote unquote truth, which is instead distortion. And that uncomfortable feeling is what your brain tries to get rid of. It tries to push you back to a place of understanding and a way that it is able to actually make sense of what's happening in front of you. This is the problem with what happens when you actually experience truth in something that goes against your worldview. Cognitive dissonance happens everywhere when we're given factual information that goes against what it is we know to believe in. When we experiences events and situations with others that may actually go against how we view the world, things that we are being told by other people that then goes against how we actually have quote unquote knowledge about the situation. That's the tricky part here, is that cognitive dissonance is a natural phenomenon that happens in our minds and in our bodies that goes against our natural state of wanting to remain calm in homeostasis, like we talked about in last episode. So really, you have your mind going against you, you have your body going against you, and your emotions confirming your misrepresentation of the situation, which then only adds to your distortion. And then we have this really cool bias. So psychology likes to add a little bit more to it. And this is where it gets more fun, where I call it confirmation bias. Now, what this is once your brain and you have decided, you know what? No, this is the truth. This is what I am accepting. What it then does is it tries to rationalize that actual step, why it believes what it believes. And what it does through confirmation bias is it tries to look for information that backs up your worldview, even if it's wrong. That's the tricky part, is your mind will then create post hoc explanations to justify what it's feeling, to justify its stance, and make you feel good about what it is you believe in. And then the fun part, because then you've only rooted yourself in your distortion through your mind, through confirmation bias, it then starts to alleviate those problems with your somatic cues and your emotional cues, because then you feel resolved. You feel more comfortable because you're able to explain again what's currently happening in front of you, even if it's wrong, which most of the time it is. And what that happens to be is what's called emotional reasoning. Because what you then experience, and this is in your cognitive state, your conscious mind, you then experience emotions that align because they don't feel bad. They actually align with your distortion. You feel more calm. You feel resolved in what you have. You feel a relief because you're not feeling those negative things anymore. And then as a result, your cognition in your somatic signals then start to calm down. You then experience that stress. It starts to resolve itself. You start to be able to breathe normally again. Your chest loosens up, things like that, because you then have aligned yourself in a way that actually makes more sense to you, but unfortunately is routed completely in a distorted view of reality. And then from there, this is where you experience what's called identity erosion. When you align with distortion, something that actually feels good to you, but is aligned in not the truth of the actual situation, your identity mistakenly takes that as part of who you are. And this is the thing that cannot happen in our path to identity evolution and identity transformation. And I cannot stress this any more than I will right here. This idea of aligning with distortion based on cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias through suppression and rationalization must not happen as much as humanly possible. Because in order for us to be able to align with who we are and who we want to become, we have to correct what our brains think is our past identity and our true identity. Because our past is in the past. Who we are is not our past. It was framed and made by our past, but it is not reflective of who we are today. And in order for us to be able to transform into who we want to become through the resonant identity, we have to let go and retrain our minds to believe in who we are and who we want to become, not our past. And identity erosion through this process is what will hinder that. Because if we align with those things that are wrong, that are based in distortion, that go against who we are, what we stand for, who we are becoming, we cannot evolve. Identity coherence becomes impossible. And we experience distortion in so many ways that it hinders our ability to transform into who we want to become. Now, what we're going to do before we go to break is I'm just going to give you this information to think about. What are some things that you may experience in distortion that go against who you actually are? We'll go over this a little bit more as we start going into the 7-day challenge. But before we go to break, I just really want you to think about that in understanding what actually in my life could be distorted that may be hindering my ability for me to being able to become who I want to become and to align with who I am today. So as you hear the break and the ads, which have fun with those, try to think about a couple of ideas of things that actually might make sense into what you are experiencing that actually is identity distortion and erosion, so that we can start to challenge those ideas to become more aligned with who we are. More after this. All right, and thanks for coming back and sticking with me. So now we're going to go into the idea of why do we believe the lies our mind tells us? What actually specifically makes sense as to why we really buy into what our mind is telling us constantly, all the time. And we're not 100% good at it. This is something that we will always face as we go through reality. Unfortunately, this is just the way that things happen. So I'm going to go through it a little bit more deeply in understanding and having you understand what the mind happens to get all this information from, how it's written, where it comes from, and why we believe the lies so strongly. And we alluded to it a little bit in terms of the confirmation bias and the cognitive dissonance that we talked to before with the suppression and rationalization of our distortions, right? But where this also comes into play is the data bank that we receive that information from. And this is held so strongly in the mind and in the body, in a vast region of our minds, which is called the vast unknown. In psychological terms, and in neurobiology, really, this is the subconscious and unconscious parts of our minds. I'm going to specifically talk about the subconscious mind, however, though, but we'll briefly talk about the unconscious just so you're aware of what they are. If you recall from past episodes, our conscious experience is only a fraction of what the rest of our body and minds experience. Because the subconscious and unconscious minds of our bodies and minds, in this case, are actually what pushes our behavior. The subconscious mind is always on and experiences everything else that our conscious mind does not. And it is on 100% of the time. And think of it as a big old journal note taker, some random monk from the 13th century just simply writing and writing and writing everything that it actually notices, from truth or distortion. The subconscious mind is always on. It notices the things that we do not notice in conscious thought, and it also records it within its vast data structure. So think of the vast unknown literally of this huge server farm where you're seeing all of these servers blinking their lights, and you have rows upon rows upon rows upon rows of servers on the left and on the right that are constantly going 100% of the time. You see their blinking lights, you see the neon that's currently happening on the floor and also on the ceiling, and you see all these random workers like left and right running around, maintaining it, writing different things, and so on. This is the subconscious writing down and recording everything that happens in your life, whether or not you're aware of it. And as such, it can also interpret things only in a certain way of what it is it's being told. It cannot reason or think for itself. It only records what it is told. So what that means is, if you happen to tell it that you are a failure, or that for whatever reason you received this distortion from an event, the subconscious records that in the vast unknown of those data servers. And it stores that every single time that we tell ourselves that we are a failure. Every single time, without fail. Because the subconscious doesn't know the difference between truth or distortion. It can't reason that way. Instead, the subconscious looks at it and says, this is truth. Great. You told me that I'm a failure. I'm recording that. That's how we're going to work with it. And so, with the unconscious mind, which is the one that responds to our bodily organs, which is the one that kind of works through and helps us regulate our bodies, the ways that we're able to live life, and so on, it pulls from that data bank and notifies the subconscious, pushed up to the conscious mind, all of those references and items when we told ourselves that we are a failure. Every single one of them, especially when we are in a threat response cycle. This is where it gets even more tricky. Now, if you recall from before, the threat response cycle is what the nervous system does when it's responding to excitement or threat. And that heightened state of awareness where we're just in such a hurry just to try to resolve the issue that we're experiencing, right? And as a result, what it does is we look around and we notice that we are experiencing all of these random thoughts about why we are a failure because our brain is suppressing our ability to see truth, especially in the threat response cycle. And it's then rationalizing its point with all of the different systems that it currently found that in that reference, I am a failure in every single data store so fast that our minds have to keep up with it. And we then are shrouded and put into a situation where it's difficult for us to think clearly. This is why the mind is so convincing with what it does. And it gets even more tricky because the emotions then match it. So then you experience those shameful feelings. You don't know how to talk about it. You want to avoid the situation. You lash out at other people because you're so angry. And that's where the reality actually sets in because it feels so real to you. It feels real. Not only are you thinking it's real, it feels real. And that's the hardest part about it. Because in this case, we're now dealing with all of this friction in our mind and in our body and in our emotions that for us to being able to actually understand what the truth is takes much more energy just to suppress all that bullshit. Because we confuse intensity with truth, intensity with truth, and we use familiarity as evidence of our truth. Let me say that again. We confuse intensity of our emotions, our somatic experience, and our thoughts as truth of who we are. And we know it because we are familiar with it. It comes from the vast unknown of our data centers, all of those different times where we have told ourselves that we are a failure, or that we are unlovable, or that we cannot make it on our own, or whatever the else may be, right? And the mind speaks so convincingly because that's the way that we converse with ourselves through thoughts, through judgments, and through words that we don't know how else to actually explain what's happening in front of us. And because it's shrouded in those areas of confirmation bias and cognitive dissonance with the rationalization and so on, when we rationalize with ourselves more and more and more to stand by that distortion, we then experience what's called dopamine. Our brain rewards us in our distortion. As crazy as it sounds, it's true. When the story makes sense to us, when we start to feel calm, when we start to recognize that we're aligning with our distortion, the brain then says, yep, you're right. And here's some dopamine to seal the deal. So you feel good about it because then you realize I can calm down now. My emotions are coming down. And now that I'm feeling good about it, that only establishes the truth of it because my emotions are no longer negative. They're comfortable. I'm calm. And so this must be true because now I feel okay. And the problem is the brain hates that uncertainty, so it suppresses it with every point of its being. That sucks, right? Like, that really sucks. To think that so many of our distortions are actually based in a bad, or I wouldn't even say bad, I would actually just say distorted view that pulls from so many instances of time where we've actually told ourselves this, that we're constantly trying to battle that. And we're doing an internal battle with ourselves, with our past reality, who we are and who we want to become, with something that's new that our brain inherently thinks is wrong. It inherently does not like it because it goes against what it is it thinks we know we are. So I'm making this sound incredibly dire for a very specific reason, because it's something that we need to be cognizant of. But I'm also here to reassure you that while this sounds bleak, it's not an end all cure all because you can change all of this. You have the power to change all of it so that it more aligns with who you are and who you are becoming. So while we need to be cognizant that our mind does do this just on a natural point, by the way, not through any fault of its own, it's just simply doing its survival job. That's not anything that's going against you. Also, just to clarify, this is not anything that is a character flaw. You are not a bad person for thinking these things because everyone does it. But it's important just to understand that we have it and be cognizant that it happens so that we can course correct. And in order to do this, we need to understand the very specific process that happens in order for us to being able to correct it when we notice it's happening. And I like to call that the triad in the resonance core framework and the resonance identity, which is the body, the emotion that happens behind it, and then the narrative that we are being told as a result from it. So recall from before that the nervous system is the first gate of sensory experience. It's the one that's constantly perceiving for threats, excitement, all that fun stuff. And it's the body where everything starts because the nervous system is the one that fires right off the bat. And then from there, the emotions then interpret the body with what it's currently saying. Is it a threat? Are we experiencing excitement? Are we experiencing something that's scary? And the emotions then match it based on our past experience because it does pull from the vast unknown of our mind. And then from there, this signals to the mind, hey, I need you to pay attention to this, which crosses the unconscious and subconscious barrier of the mind into our conscious experience of thought. And what the mind then does is it creates a story, a narrative that explains the emotion and the somatic tension that we're experiencing. And this is where the source of distortion occurs, because the story is often wrong because it's based on incomplete data. So, for an example, let's say that you realize you have to study for a test tomorrow, which is a stressor, but your body then takes it to mean something else. What first starts is you then start to feel tightness in your chest because your body is telling you that something is off. And then the emotion then lands with it as well, saying, oh gosh, I'm anxious because now I need to do this really long piece of study in order for me to be able to pass this test. And then the mind says, in result to it, you know what? I'm failing because unfortunately, I just do not understand why I have such a hard time spanning my time of studying. I am not going to fail. I am not going to pass this test because now I have to cram the night before. I'm going to cause issues. And whenever I do this in my past experience of my life, I always fail my tests. Why can't I get this right? That is the experience of the triad. The body, which in this case we call we call ethos, which is yourself, emotion, which is the pathos of the actual triad, and the narrative, which happens to be the logos that goes behind it. If this sounds familiar, this is the triad that we explained earlier about Aristotle, about interpretive hygiene. I use it also here to explain the sensory experience of how we experience and formulate narratives. It always starts with the body because the body is the first gate. The emotions then happen to respond to the body's signals. And then the mind then creates narratives that explain the body's chest tightening and so on, and the emotional cues that we're experiencing in relation to the body. This is where it gets tricky because that triad can either work for us or it can work against us. And in many times it works against us because it is shrouded in distortion of our past self. But before we go blaming our body for everything that's currently happening, there is something that we do need to make sure that you are aware of. The body does not lie. It keeps the score of everything that's happening around us, but it is the mind that lies to us. Because here's the reason why. When the body is responding to something, when it notices a threat, an excitement piece, something we need to pay attention, all it's doing is it's giving us raw data to work with. Now, what do I mean by raw data? So when you think of raw data, it's anything that does not have any meaning attached to it. So for example, chest tightening, I'm experiencing chest tightening. Okay, great. That is a raw data point, a somatic cue that we are experiencing. I'm noticing that I'm experiencing shortness of breath. That is also a raw data point because that's what you're experiencing. You're starting to have shorter, more tense breaths in and out. This also goes into the place of emotional cues, by the way. I am experiencing sadness. I am experiencing joy. I'm noticing that I'm fearful right now. These are not positive or negative experiences. These are raw data points. Emotional cues and somatic cues, which is what those are simply just data. That's all they are. The only difference is that it's based on what's called the interpretation of what it is that we place on them, which gives them what's called meaning. So when we experience fear, it's not in result to anything specifically. It's just an elicited response from the vast unknown of our conscious, unconscious, subconscious mind. That's all it is. There is no inherent meaning to anything that we experience from an emotional or a somatic meaning point. And this is hard to hear, by the way, because emotions can really feel real, especially when they are attached to something that is external or internal within us, right? The trauma that we experienced before, past experiences that make us feel this way, and so on, right? But the truth is, The mind just simply interprets what that's actual data and places the meaning on it because it's giving us a narrative of what it thinks all of that's coming from. That's where the distortion comes from. It's not our body, it's not even our emotions, it's our mind. Our mind is the problem because the body becomes the corrective mechanism that helps us being able to take that narrative and restructure it in truth. And how do we do that? Through the same way that we know how to calm our bodies down from a threat response cycle in interoception. The process by which we look at something and we say, wait a minute, this is not something I need to worry about here. I'm just experiencing chest tightening to this situation. It wasn't anything the person said to me. I'm just reacting to it from a past experience, whether or not it's even related to. And when we go more into what's called narrative reframing, we understand that every single distortion that we actually experience, and here's the paradoxical crazy part about it, is every distortion in some way, shape, or form is rooted in truth. A truth of an actual event that occurred, but made us think that it represented something else, which is the distortion of that hidden truth. Because the body is the only part of us that lives in real time. The mind doesn't. It's the mind. It's the body. It's the body. Because the body is the one that's constantly firing, looking around for threats and excitement and things, but the mind is just simply interpreting what is happening. So when we are asking and talking about distortion versus truth, the body is where everything starts. That also includes your decisions, not your mind, because your mind is only making an interpretation of what your body is doing. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to talk about the window of choice, but we're first going to take a break. In the next section, we'll talk about what the window of choice is, how we're able to sustain the window of choice, and ensuring that we make constant, aligned decisions with our chosen and true identity, not our past one. More after this. Welcome back. Now we're going to talk about what we can do with all of this distortion. Because painted a pretty bleak process here, I can guarantee it. You're probably just thinking, I thought that I was bad before. Now you're telling me that all of this is actually preordained, that this just happens on its own. There is nothing I can do about it. And I now feel even worse about myself. Now, hang on a second. Take a couple of deep breaths before we move forward, because I'm here to tell you that's not the case. The way that I framed everything in the past couple sections is only to give you awareness. You are not a bad person for having these things happen. We are human. This is how our bodies work. This is what our mind does. And it's all rooted in survival. This is just how our systems work because their number one goal is to keep you alive. That's it. Because really what it's trying to do is to help you, just to make decisions based on what it already knows. But unfortunately, because of that process, it usually does more harm than good. That's really all it is. And it doesn't make you any less of a person for thinking that way. This just happens to be the way that you have experienced trauma, experienced situations that are uncomfortable, and what you've done in your past to deal with them. But the best part is you can change all that. And you can make it so that you actually are more rooted in who you are and who you want to become. Because the best part here is that subconscious journal writer, that monk in the freaking monastery, can be trained to write truth, not distortion, because we control that. Even though we cannot specifically tell the subconscious what to record, we can tell it what not to record and instead reframe it to say, this is truth, not what you're actually seeing, because this is called narrative reframing. But we're going to get to that in a little bit. So I just want to explain this because first, when we go into the window of choice, which is right now, I want to make sure that you understand this is not a bleak picture. This is only to give you a sense of what happens when you experience these bad things. So what is this window of choice? At a certain point, when we want to become someone that we are and to be someone that we want to become, We can't just sit around and do nothing. This is the hardest part about transformation, the hardest part about evolution, the hardest part about defining your identity, and also about standing up for what you believe in and who you are. It requires action, requires action. You can't just think your way out of it. You can't just suppress what it is that you're experiencing. Both of those will only do you more harm than good. You must action on it. This is why we do our 7-day challenges, because action is what causes identity transformation and what's called identity coherence. And we do that through what is called the window of choice. Because when we are in a situation, whatever that may be, positive, negative, or so on, the thing is, we experience that as sensations, right? We experience that in understanding all of these different ways that we can respond to and act in the situation we are in, or not, because we have something with what is called choice, agency, and the ability of us to author how we live our lives, and in what way, and according to what we believe in and who we are. That is called identity erosion or identity coherence. When you make decisions based on who you are and who you stand for, you are reaffirming to your entire body, your entire mind, and your emotions who you are, as well as other people as well, because you are communicating through your subtlest signals that the decisions that you are making aligns with your identity or erodes it. And you are the one that makes that decision as to which you choose. I've already told you specifically, you do not want to erode your identity based on distortion, because it then puts a false sense of who you are to other people. And as a result, keeps you in your former past self, which is who you don't want to be. You don't want to be a failure. You don't want to be unlovable. You don't want to be poor. You don't want those things. You want something else based on who you are and who you want to become. That is what identity coherence means. You make aligned decisions that specifically communicate to yourself and the world who you are, why you stand for what you stand for, and who you are becoming. All of those things which are authored and chosen by you. This is action in action. Doing things that align with all of those things. Because in what happens in the window of choice, and this is where your agency is then expanded or collapsed, between the sensations that you experience in your body and the story that your mind then tells yourself, there's this little window that happens between all of that. Because that window between the time that you experience something within your body, mind, and emotions, up until the point that you decide to make a decision, that entire process is called the window of choice. And when you are in a collapsed view or an expanded view, you either make decisions that may not 100% reflect what's happening, or you're given insight into new decisions that you may not have been aware of, depending on if you are in a collapsed window of choice or an expanded window of choice. And here's the simple difference between the two. When you experience collapse, you have chest tightening. Your emotions are flying high. Your narratives are telling you information that is just not true. You're experiencing distortions of reality, and you see things not for what they are, because you are experiencing a distorted reality from really what is actually happening, either inside or outside of yourself. And the exact opposite is true with an expanded window of choice, because you recognize instead that everything you're experiencing is just simply data. Your chest tightening, your tunnel vision, your fears, your shame, your narratives, all of those are just simply data points. They're in no way reflective of who you are. They're just simply how your body and your mind are trying to make sense of what's happening within you or around you. And what you can do is you have the ability through somatic tracking and interoception of widening your window of choice through grounding techniques, through understanding what's happening around you, and re-grounding yourself in who you are and what you are becoming. and what you stand for. Because the truth of the matter is, you cannot stop the mind from lying to you. Unfortunately, this is a reality you now will be aware of the rest of your life. I'm sorry I had to put that on you, and I'm sorry that now you have additional information that may potentially push you toward a little bit more self-sabotage. Please don't do that. That's not the point here. The idea is simply telling you this is what your body does. This is what your mind does. It is a natural phenomenon, and you are not a bad person for experiencing it. It is a good thing. But the best part about it is you can stop believing in it. You can stop it all in its tracks. And the best part is you can then reframe all of it to actually mean who you are and what you stand for and who you are becoming. So in that situation where you experienced that test where you failed or you got a C plus instead of an A, and your mind starts going down the pathway and spiraling, or you have trouble with studying because you didn't study the day before, whatever, you literally stop yourself dead in its tracks first. You recognize that this is a distorted view of your reality. And instead, you look at what actually is happening in front of you through grounding, through presence, by breathing, by stretching, calming yourself down, and recognizing what's actually happening in the present moment. Where the truth is, you just got a C plus. That's it. That is in no way indicative of who you are or how bad you were. Could you have maybe made some better decisions to get you a better grade? Probably. Maybe, maybe not. You might explore that. But it doesn't recollect or show you that you are a failure or a bad person for getting that grade. It never did. It never does. And so instead, we can look at it and say, wait a minute, I just got a C plus on this. I still am asked to get a C or greater in my classes by my parents or also through my college degree. So did I really fail at everything? No. It was just in that one moment that unfortunately, yeah, you got a lower grade than you wanted. But you can then look at that and reframe that process and saying, you know what? I know what I can do to improve this. And then you can give yourself steps. So your subconscious mind writes in the vast unknown of its data centers, I'm not a failure and here's why. And then you write down specifically what actually is truth so that your subconscious then looks at that and says, okay. And then it writes that instead because you have then stopped your narrative reframing narratives in the bud. You stopped it, you nipped them, you stopped your emotions, you calmed yourself down just simply by using grounding techniques, and you reframed what actually happened to yourself in truth, in the data, in the raw data of what actually is going down. So how do we do that? And this is the birthplace of how we can actually establish identity coherence, better agency, and making better decisions. And I'm about to show you exactly how to do that right now. How to work with your damn lying mind. First, you need to ground yourself. Grounding techniques with whatever makes sense for you so that you get out of your head, you calm your emotions, and you slow the things down. You're not making a decision yet. You're not thinking your way out of it. You're instead just bringing yourself back to the present moment, breathing deep breaths, taking a walk, removing yourself from the situation if you can. If you're with someone, just tell them, hey, I need to calm down a little bit. Give me just a moment here. You first need to ground yourself in a means where you're able to think clearly and be able to just notice what's happening with your cues. Because here's what you first need to do. You need to slow down the narrative. You don't fight it. If you fight it, it only makes it worse, just so you know. Those of you who are overthinkers, you know this. Never fight your thoughts. Never fight your emotions. Never fight your cues. They're just simply signals. Instead, recognize once you're grounded and feel safe that you can bring yourself back to reality, touch different things, look around you, do whatever you need to in order to get yourself out of your head, while also acknowledging with everything else, I notice that I'm experiencing these thoughts. I notice that I'm experiencing these fearful emotions. That's acknowledgement. And that's also acceptance, which is what your body and your mind want you to do. You're not accepting what they're saying. You're simply acknowledging that you're experiencing these things. That's it. And you do however long you need to in order to be able to make that work. I also should say is if this becomes too much, remove yourself from the situation or get help from a trained medical professional, especially if this is brand new to you and the emotions and the thoughts become too intense. It's difficult the first few times. I will be honest, because I had to do the same thing when I was experiencing it. I recommend if it does become too much, definitely set an appointment with a therapist. Have them walk you through some techniques. Have them show you the process so you can ground yourself. But the more you practice it, the easier it gets. I just give you that clarity and also that disclaimer because I want to make sure that you're also safe. The next step, once you have grounded yourself, is you then want to experience it from a third party point of view by checking yourself, looking at yourself and feeling the things that you're experiencing, thinking the thoughts that you're thinking, but looking at them from a third person's point of view. Giving yourself permission just to notice things. Where am I experiencing these tightness in my body? What are the emotions that I'm actually experiencing? Without any judgment, while not giving them any type of label, while not adding any type of meaning to them. Writing down the thoughts that you might be experiencing, just writing them down, not giving into them, not believing them, just simply writing them down so that you can actually understand what they are, which what we understand them now to be as data points. And then what you need to do is you need to separate the sensations and then label them according to one of three different means that are called light cues, indifferent cues, and shadow cues. Because again, we are not putting these into black or white thinking. Like you may experience sadness and may all of a sudden decide that that is a bad emotion. That's not what we're doing here. We're experiencing all of the different cues and the thoughts, and we're labeling them according to what it is that we believe we're experiencing through. Now, maybe you might be experiencing sadness, but it could be a light cue. So, what are the differences between these three types of categorizations? Light cues are things that you resonate with. So, things that uplift you, things that actually align with your identity. That could be chest tightening, maybe is an enlightenment because it's showing you that what you're trying to do actually is aligned, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that it could be a negative thing, but it is up to you to decide how you want to label it. And light cues do that in a form of resonance, where resonance again uplift you, they expand you, they make you want to integrate, and so on. Indifferent cues have no emotional or mental charge. You may just be experiencing a chest tightening, but it doesn't mean anything to you. It just simply is there. And you can't really describe if it makes you feel or think in a certain way. But you still want to label them because indifferent cues also give you data points. So when you notice those cues like chest tightening, your breath is going faster, you're experiencing certain emotions, and they don't really give you any specific type of meaning in resonance, you still label them as indifferent. And then the third type are what are called shadow cues. Shadow cues are the ones that are shrouded in distortion, that make you experience what's called dissonance or misalignment. You're experiencing this shadow cue and you realize that it just doesn't seem to match anywhere. It's experiencing just something that just feels off, that just either makes you feel distorted, it contracts your ability to feel resonance, things like that. And that can be anything somatically, narrative, or cue as well in your emotions. Because you need these things in order to being able to understand what they are, because we need to separate the sensations that you're experiencing from the actual story or narrative that you have. And you do this by asking yourself some questions, which are just curious clarity questions. What am I feeling? Where is the sensation happening in my body? What am I telling myself in my narratives? Is there truth in any of this, right? And then what you want to do is use resonance as a compass for yourself. Resonance is what will tell you what actually is truth and what is distortion. Does the story feel true Does it feel familiar? Is this something I've experienced before? Why did I experience it? And so on. And from there, you then need to separate the actual narrative from its hidden truth. And we did that earlier with the test example. You're thinking that you're a failure because you received a C plus on your test. But the hidden truth here are two things. One, you've experienced just a C plus on a test. And two, you're associating the failure step from multiple times where you've experienced the same type of grade and then failed a course, or has caused you strife because for whatever reason that score was seen negatively by someone else, maybe by your parents, maybe by yourself, maybe you held yourself to a high or a point where you just didn't reach it for whatever reason, right? Those are the hidden truths that you need to pull from the distorted view. Because then, when you notice the hidden truth behind it, we then do the final step, which is how you work with that lying mind. You rewrite the narrative in truth, which is, I received a C plus on this test, but I'm still able to improve it because I know that I can do better by studying harder. You've literally told your subconscious that what you actually experienced from your thoughts is distorted, and instead gave it a better frame of reference that it now will record in that data center as truth, not distortion. And the more times you do this in real time, you actually will start to rewrite your narratives so they are shrouded in who you are and who you are becoming. And eventually over time, because you'll have to do this multiple times, it won't just simply resolve itself the first time. The more times you do this, you then start to recognize that your past experiences don't hold any weight. You may still experience those thoughts and emotions and so on, but over time, your subconscious then starts to surface the actual truth instead of distortion. And then from there, when those distorted thoughts or feelings come into play, you then recognize that they're just past echoes. They're things that don't matter anymore because they're not reflective of who you are and who you are becoming. Because your subconscious mind is also pushing up to you the actual narratives that you yourself have written and had it right in the vast unknown. So now do we just simply say that your mind is a data bank that is just constantly writing who you are and putting yourself down? No, because now you actually can use the vast unknown of your mind to your advantage because you can rewrite who you are right there on the spot. And your subconscious, because it doesn't know the difference between truth or distortion, simply writes it down, but it actually is now truth because you have rewritten it. That is how you free yourself from your cues. That is how you free yourself from your past identity, by rewriting who you are in truth, because you are the one that is making your life better. And the more times you do this, the more you will actually feel aligned with who you are and who you are becoming. And it becomes so much easier and more fulfilling because you are now making those decisions based on who you are. This is the beauty of narrative reframing. In closing, what I just want to do is bring it home before we get into the 7-day challenge. Your mind is a tool. It is not a tyrant. It is not simply something that is constantly going against you. Instead, what it is there for is it's there to help you make decisions. It's there to help you see where your misalignments occur. It's there to help you understand what it thinks you are, and also shows you what you need to work on so that you can better align with who you are and who you are becoming and what you stand for. Because the goal is not to silence the mind. It's not to avoid your thoughts. It's not to avoid your cues. It's not to avoid any of that. It's also not to shut it down, fight it, yell at it, scream at it, whatever. The goal is to become the architect of your own reality, to become the architect of your interpretation of what's happening around you, which is the best part of this whole thing. You get to decide who you are, not your brain, not your past, you. Because ending with a grounding point to being able to show you this resonance that is so powerful, it will literally transform you. When you stop believing every story your mind tells you, you finally become available to your actual life, today and in the future. And so finally, this brings us to the 7-day challenge, which is what we need to do to practice how to do this narrative reframing and rewrite the way that we see reality. And we do this simply through the process of noticing our distortions, noticing our misalignments, and finding the ways of what we need to do to rewrite them in truth. Now, this is going to be difficult the first time, and it takes some practice in order to do this. So I don't want you to go through and try to rewrite everything that you can possibly think of. As we like to say here, small moments and small actions turn into small wins and eventually become part of who you are. So we're only going to pick one this week. And we're going to do this as a 7-day process. You'll see this again on the website, and it's also in the show notes, so feel free to use that as your template, but let's go over it here. On day 1, the day that you're listening to this podcast, I want you to catch the very first story that you recognize is shrouded in distortion. Don't fight it. Don't really even try to make sense of it. Just catch it. Write down what it is that you actually noticed in your mind, what your mind told you that you recognized is shrouded in distortion and is wrong. And then from there, the next day, I want you to find the sensations of what it is you experienced. Write them down, only in understanding what they are in raw data. You experienced fear. You experienced shame in yourself. You experienced chest tightening. You experienced tunnel vision, shortness of breath. Write them down, everything that you can think of in that moment when you think about that actual story. And then the next day, I want you to then name what the actual distortion is. Identify the actual pattern. Is it mind reading, all or nothing thinking? Is it catastrophizing who you are? Is it making you think that you are lesser of a person? Is it something that aligns with your past identity? Write down what the distortion actually is. And then ask yourself what else could be true in relation to it. Open the window a little bit. Open your window of choice. Let yourself think about it for a minute and dwell on it, but not actually bring yourself into a level of distortion. Understand what it is, but also understand what actually is true in despite what your mind is telling you. And with that truth, I want you to check for resonance. Read on those possibilities back to yourself and feel on what actually is resonance specifically. Take those cues and label them in light, indifference, or shadow. And then try to see the light ones specifically for what they are and understand how they actually make you feel in terms of your resonance and your current and true identity. And then once you're ready to do it, rewrite the narrative out of distortion and rewrite it according into hidden truth and real truth. Because you need to pull the narrative away from what actually happened. Because then you will start to uncover where the truth actually lies, so you can rewrite that narrative and you can utilize it every time. And finally, you're then going to practice the sequence in real time. Do the whole entire thing all at once. When you experience another one, or use the same one if you don't experience one that day, notice it, sense what it is happening in your body and your mind, name exactly what the distortion is, expand the thoughts of what it actually could mean or what actually is true, and then write down your resonance and understanding of what the actual hidden truth is so you can then rewrite the narrative. And we're going to go ahead and close it. This is really what we're trying to understand today when we're talking about your mind lies. The challenge was not about fixing your mind, which in a way it kind of is, but that's actually not the point here. It's about reclaiming authorship of you, who you are, and everything you stand for, while also expanding your window of choice so that you can understand and broaden your horizons into what more actually might be true. Your mind will always tell you stories. That is just a fact of life. And your body keeps the score because it is constantly a thing that is trying to understand what is happening around you. That's both of their job. Your body keeps the score, and your mind will then distort it, unfortunately. But you then get to decide which ones you live from. And when you rewrite your actual narratives in truth, based on their hidden truths, you literally retrain your body and your mind in who you are and who you want to become so that you can transform and become a coherent identity through the resonant identity that you are trying to form each and every single day. I just want to say thanks for listening to my podcast and this episode. If it resonated with you, please leave a review and subscribe to it on your favorite podcast service. And feel free to share it with those people that resonate with you and make you the best person of who you are. Have fun, be safe, know who you are and what you stand for, and make choices aligned with your true and chosen identity. Stay safe out there. Goodbye now.